All right, this is section 5.5 on percents. Our essential question is, what is the connection between ratios, fractions, and percents? So I put just a couple examples here, A to B, A over B, and A percent. It could also be B percent too. So we're going to learn about percents in this section. Our key idea for 5.5, is writing percents as fractions. All right, so in words, a percent is a part to whole ratio where the whole is 100. So you can write a percent as a fraction with a denominator of 100. In numbers, it means, so 60% equals 60 out of 100. It also equals 60 as 60 over 100. So if you look at it, this would be your part, your 60, your line, or your fraction bar, sorry, I'm trying to make a small arrow, would be per, and then, I'm using the same color again, then I would have my whole, which would be 100. Okay, and we would just do as words 100, that would always be the bottom number. So my part being 60 per 100, being my whole. When we look at the algebra for it, it would just be n percent, so n could mean anything, equals n over 100. Example 1 is writing percents as fractions. So a homework problem might look like this. It might say write 35% as a fraction in simplest form. So what we just learned was we can take 35% and we can take any number and put it over 100, and then I have it as a fraction. So you write it as a fraction with a denominator of 100. I'm going to jot that down real quick. Okay, now let's look at the little graph piece of paper here. So I'm just going to make this bigger. You don't have to write this down, obviously, but this just makes sense. It's in your book if you're following along. I'm on page 220. But if I have this piece of graph paper, and you think about it equaling 100, okay, I actually have to go back. I'm getting rid of my graph paper because I messed up. I have to make it 100 real quick. Okay, sorry, that makes more sense now. So now I have this piece of paper, graph paper, that's 100. I'm going to count out 35 units. And if I count out my 35 units, that means I'm representing 35 out of 100, right? So I'm going to sit here, I'm going to count them, and then when I get to 35, it'll be a good representation of what I mean. Okay, so that means all this area here would completely be shaded in. And, again, you don't have to write this down, but this would represent 35 out of 100. And that means I'm covering 35% of something, in this case units, on a piece of graph paper. So I'm covering these units, 35 of them, to represent 35%. Because, let's see if I can make this smaller. There we go. Because I'm using 35%, it's 35 out of 100. That's exactly what I just represented with my graph paper. My last step is to simplify. So basically, if I'm writing 35% as a fraction in simplest form, I've got to simplify. A lot of us struggle with this, and this is something I really want you to pay attention to. I'm going to focus on my last two numbers. Maybe I read. I'm going to focus on my 5 and my 0. The reason is because I need to find a number that can go into both of these numbers, so something that's divisible by a 5 and a 0, and that way I can divide it out. So I know right now that 35 divided by 5 equals something. I know I can divide out 100 divided by 5. I couldn't use 10 because 10 can't go in evenly to 35. However, it can go in, 5 can evenly go into both of these. So just kind of like what we were working with before, now I'm going to divide by 5, divide by 5. So 35 divided by 5 ends up equaling 7, because 7 times 5 equals 35. And then 100 divided by 5 equals 20. Can I go any simpler than 7/20ths? what you need to say to yourself, is there any number that's divisible by 7 and 20? Can any number go into both of those? Start thinking about it. Can 2? Can 3? Can 4? So let's start with 2. Can 2 go into 7? No. Can 3 go into 7 evenly? No. Can 4 go into 7 evenly? No. How about 5? No. 6? No. 7? Yes. Can 7 go into 20 evenly? No. So that's where you stop, because if you get above 7, it won't work. You should also know that 7/20 is reduced all the way because 7 is a prime number. So my answer, write 35%, let me get my pointer, write 35% as a fraction in simplest form. My answer is 7/20. My next example is to write 100% as a fraction in simplest form. My first step is to write as a fraction with a denominator of 100. 100 over 100. Because I'm talking about my 100% is what they gave us as your option. My second step is to simplify. Now we could divide this out and say, well, I've got 0 and 0. I could divide by 10. But we're not going to do that, because you should all know that any number over itself, 100 divided by 100, will always equal 1. Any number divided by itself. It could be 50 over 50. It could be 80 over 80. It could be 61 over 61. They all equal 1. If we don't know that by now, you do now. Don't forget that. So in simplest terms, simply saying we know that 100 over 100 equals 1. So we've done one step, we've done two steps, we've simplified it as far as we can. Let's look at it as what it would look like on graph paper. If I had a sheet of graph paper that was boxed out to be, there's 100 units in there, what would I fill in? You would fill in your top number, or the fraction, or the percent that you were actually given. So in this case, we would fill in 100 blocks or 100 units. We should all know that this is worth, I just said that, 100. So every single one of these boxes would be filled in, because it would equal one entire whole. Okay, and that's exactly what I was just saying. This equals one whole. Part C says to write 174% as a mixed number in simplest form. So now we have more than 100%. We've got more than one whole. So how would you write that? Well, start with your steps. Write as a fraction with a denominator of 100. So if I've got 174, I would write it over as a fraction over 100. We all know how to get from an improper fraction to a mixed number, correct? It's asking us to do it in simplest form. So we say, how many times does 100 go into 174? Well, it goes in one whole time. What do I have left? 74 over 100. Am I done? No. This is where you guys struggle, is you have to try to find a number that will go into both of them. We could easily start dividing it by 2. The reason I know 2 is because 74 is an even number, and so is 100. So I could divide them both by 2 very easily. So let's divide 74 divided by 2 and 100 divided by 2. 74 divided by 2 gives you 37. And you might not know that off the top of your head. You can do the math on the side if you had to. You could have done it like this. 74 divided by 2. 2 goes into 7 3 times. Bring down my 4. 2 goes into 14 7 times. Okay, and then there'd be 0 left over. Okay, so 37. 100 divided by 2, we should all know if we divided that in half, it'd be 50. Don't forget to bring your 1 back over. So now I have 1 and 37 50ths. So you have to go through all of your numbers. Can 2 go into both of those? No, it can only go into 50. 3, 4, 5. You have to keep going until you figure out for sure, and you've made sure that it can't go any further. Again, this is a very common problem in 6th grade, is that we can't reduce fractions. It's a lot to think about. You have to be certain. So this is as far as you can reduce it. So part 2 was simplify. Write 174% as a mixed number in simplest form. Our answer is 1 and 37/50ths. Real quick, let's look at what it would look like on the graph paper like this. So I would need 2 of them because my first one would be filled completely because you're dealing with one whole. So my first one's completely filled in, all 100 squares. And my second one, we would have to focus on not quite as many, but how many would I do in my second one? Well, we started off with 174 over 100 with our original fraction. So I would have to count up 74 of these. So there's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then obviously we would fill that in a little bit better once we figured out how many we had. Okay, and again, this is just for a visual, so you kind of have an idea of what it looks like as on the graph paper. Okay, for this next example, we have a new key idea. Our first key idea was writing percents as fractions. Our new key idea is writing fractions as percents. So we're doing the opposite. So we're really going the complete opposite. In words, this means write an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. Then write the numerator with the percent symbol. So in numbers, it would look like this. So if 1/4, we want to make sure that our bottom number is 100, kind of like when we dealt with ratio tables. How did I get from 4 to 100? Well, 4 times 25 equals 100. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. Here we go again. So the top is times 25. That would mean my new equivalent fraction would be 25 100ths, which in turn equals whatever I get it to a top number over 100, I can get a percent. It's 25%. Example 2, writing a fraction as a percent. So if this is a homework problem or a test question and the directions said, write 3/50ths as a percent, what would you do? So you start off with your 3/50ths, and we know for sure our bottom number has to get to 100 in order for us to get an equal percent. So how did I get from 50 to 100? Well, very easily we can multiply it by 2. We should all be able to tell that. Whatever I do to the top, or to the bottom in this case, I'm going to do to the top. 3 times 2 is 6. So my answer would be 6%. Example 3 is our real life application. So the question says, a drought affects 9 out of the 12 Midwestern states. What percent of the Midwestern states are affected by the drought? And this is the picture they give us. So they're looking at all of these states that are in red. Those are the ones that are affected by this drought. Oops. Let's bring that down. So the question's saying what percent. So we're finding a percentage here, right? We know that 9 out of 12 are affected. So let's simplify it. I know that 3 can go into both of these numbers to simplify. Why do I know that? Because 9 divided by 3 equals 3. 12 divided by 3 equals 4. When you have two numbers that are right in a row, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that, which I have 3 and I have 4, you can't go any simpler than that. So I simplified it. Then we need to take that number, 3/4, and in the previous example it said writing a fraction as a percent. Now I need to get it to where the bottom number equals 100. Why didn't I go from 9/12? Because 12 doesn't go into 100 evenly. You have to simplify first. You can't get any further unless you do, unless you're doing it mentally or something, but I don't want you doing it that way. I want you to simplify it first, then from this step you can go up to 100. 4 times what equals 100? Okay, well, we should all know that 4 times 25, it's kind of like counting quarters. There's 4 quarters in a dollar. There's 4 times 25 equals 100. Whatever you do to the bottom, you're going to do to the top. We should know that 25 or 3 quarters would equal 75. That's kind of how I've always done it. So we should know that a percent would equal 75%, and it would be of the Midwestern states are affected by the drought. For this section, I'm not going to do any of the on your owns. We're going to do some more practice problems in class to help you better understand this, and then we'll move on from there.